All right, let's look at the top 6 now and count it down from number 6, because there's some intrigue tonight about who's going to be at number 1. We think we'll see the highest-ranked one-loss team is Oregon sitting there, Booger.
Yeah, I love how Oregon is playing. Again, the one loss at Washington, but offensively, defensively, Dan Lanning has built a very physical team, and they're playing their best football with a big win in Utah.
First team out, at least for these initial rankings, is at number 5. Well, drama. The Washington Huskies, Kalen DeBoer, the head coach, is going to join us in a few moments.
And I think this goes back to what Greg was just talking about. Oregon has absolutely looked like a better football team than Washington in the last couple weeks, but Washington did beat them. But if you watch Washington against Arizona State, against Stanford, they struggled. So if you looked at these teams right now and said who looks like the better team today, it would absolutely be Oregon, but Washington did beat them, so they're 5 and Oregon 6.
And they're also undefeated.
Exactly.
That makes a little bit of a difference, too. At number 4.
Exactly.
Florida State. Now, Booger, we've had this discussion a couple times. You and I are a little bit higher on the Seminoles than some.
Yeah, I love Florida State. I think they have the most explosive offense in the country. Their front 7 is deep. They got playmakers on the outside at the wide receiver, Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman. I think they're one of the better teams in the country. Surprised to see them this low at 4, though, Rece.
Okay, so Greg, as we look at this now, the 3 teams left that we haven't seen yet, 2-time reigning national champion Georgia, playoff teams from last year, Michigan and Ohio State. Before we unveil it, who's going to be at number 3? Who do you think?
I think at number 3, it's going to be Michigan. And it's entirely about the strength of schedule. They've looked dominant, they've looked complete, but against who? And with all due respect to Rutgers and UNLV, it's just not up to the par of some of the other teams.
Let's see number 3. Good call, Mr. McElroy. Michigan at number 3. Now there's drama. 2 teams that played a classic in the college football playoff last year, Georgia and Ohio State. Dogs won it at the very end by a single. Who's number 2? Georgia.
Kirby Smart is doing backflips right now.
Is number 2.
So happy.
He's got his bulletin board material.
So the number 1 team in the initial rankings of the college football playoff, Ohio State. And the reason is pretty clear. Ohio State, in terms of dominance, hasn't looked like Georgia or Michigan, or really even Florida State in a lot of the games. However, they easily have the 2 best wins on the board. I mean, they went to Notre Dame and they won. They beat Penn State at home, and a solid win against Wisconsin. Are you at all surprised, Kirk, that Ohio State is number 1?
I wouldn't be surprised if anybody was number 1. I think the resume speaks for itself. That's why they put him up at 1. I'm sure it was a great discussion about Georgia, 2-time defending champ, but it's all about 2023 and what's happened this year. The great thing about this is, at the end of the day, whether you're 1 or you're 2 or you're 3 or 4, all these teams are going to control their own destiny. Even Ohio State and Michigan playing each other. You look at Florida State now, a team that you've talked about there, Rece. They're in a really good spot, controlling their own destiny. But there's the numbers, and that's probably what stood out to the committee is what Ohio State did. Going to South Bend, beating Penn State, and even beating Wisconsin in Madison, an impressive win.
I do want to point out, while Michigan's schedule is poor and so is Georgia's, 100 or below, remaining schedule, strength of schedule, Michigan is number 1 and Georgia is number 6. So they're going to be tested down the stretch, and we'll find out.
Georgia has a gauntlet coming up. I mean, if you look at what they have coming up this week in Missouri, Missouri's real. I mean, I know they're not the traditional blue blood brand, and people have kind of slowly gotten on board with them being okay. They're real. They have a good quarterback. They have explosive playmakers. Then you got Ole Miss. And then you have a road trip to Tennessee. We kind of looked at Notre Dame a couple weeks ago. It's like at the end of the run, it's like, man, they're out of gas, and they lost to Louisville. Could that potentially happen to Georgia? Because if they get through this gauntlet unscathed, I'd be shocked if by week 12, when they're teeing it up against Georgia Tech, if they're not sitting atop the rankings.
I think each year we try to figure out, because there's new committee members each year. In the first ranking, you sort of just try to figure out which way is this committee going to look at things. Is it a lot of eye tests? Is it a lot of resume? We know it has to be a combination, but I think with these rankings, this lets us know that they respect the resume more so than the eye test. Because if you watched Ohio State play in Maryland, play Wisconsin, they didn't really look dominant, but they won their football games. But their resume is the best. So this committee is telling us right now that your resume is going to lead in the barn house of what we're looking at when we rank these teams.
I want to see who you beat, how you beat them, and as we progress through the season, are you playing better? You look at Ohio State. Quarterback kind of shaky at the beginning of the season. Here lately, starting to play a little bit better. And you can't tell me those people sitting in that room, they don't watch how you're playing. Are you getting better? Are you getting worse? Sometimes a win is not just a win. Yeah, you want to win, but how are you look when you win these games?
Does Brock Bowers being out affect Georgia at all this early? What do you think?
It didn't against Florida.
I'm saying as far as the committee, as far as the committee is concerned.
Sure.
If you watched them, if I was a Georgia fan, I watched that game, I was like, without Brock Bowers, that's what Carson Beck looked like. I think it's going to help him long run. But if you're in the room and you're ranking these teams, and you're ranking a Georgia team without Brock Bowers, does that matter to you when you're trying to think of how good they are?
It may have more. If Georgia were to stub their toe and they lose without Brock Bowers, I think it would have an effect in the committee room because they lost without their best player.
I think that's fair, too. Kirk, and I would say, too, that we do try to draw conclusions and get an idea of how the committee...
Give me something I can feel. Light a cigarette.